Thank you for joining us at World of Pets podcast. We love having you here on a weekly basis. And, we want our pets to live as long as possible, but we want that to be a good quality life. So to that end, we on this podcast explore all things about pets and animals so that we can have them around for a long time, but they are living a quality life. So again, thank you for joining us. Take it away, hosts.
Welcome back to World of Pets podcast. We are very blessed tonight to have Amy here to talk about horses. But first, we want to just make sure that everybody goes to debspets.com. That's debspets.com, debspets.com, for you to find supplements for pet and human health and wellness. Anthony, my wonderful podcast host. Did you change your subtitle again? You did.
No, that's what it was last week, too.
Oh, okay.
You were saying something about being pet spurts or experts or something. And of course, an X is just, it used to be, has been, and a spurt is water under pressure. So I'm neither one of those things. And
Amy, welcome to the show. Tonight we're going to talk about you rescuing a horse, which I have never experienced any conversation with people about that. So I'm kind of going to let you drive the conversation. We'll drop in when we have questions about it.
Okay. Well, I was, I think, 42, and I thought I was adopting a 4-month-old colt for my daughter. Turns out it was actually more a pet for me or a friend for me who I learned so much about myself from. We rescued him from a Premarin farm in Canada through an organization here in Vermont. And I remember picking him up and how tiny he was, and he had a sticker on his butt. And I thought, what am I getting myself into here? I had been reading and going to a few workshops, and I got the whole DVD series of the Pat Pirelli Natural Horsemanship. And those were the things that I really used to get me through the day. The first week, he was pretty scared because he was new, and we were told that it was best to have him be by himself for a little while, so he'll be bond with us as opposed to another horse first. But after about a week and mealtime, he became a crazy man. So the whole challenge for me was really how to project confidence and also not get myself hurt. And so each day I was waking up thinking, okay, how am I going to get through this day? And it was just such a remarkable experience to kind of teach each other. And what I mean by that is the first time I put a halter on him, I had him inside the shelter that I built him. I had a 2-stall shelter with a door that, was like up to my chest, I guess. And I put the halter on him through the door instead of walking in there because I had never had a horse before, much less trained one. And so then I was doing all the different techniques with the lead line and, getting him to back up and move forward. And I think probably the most amusing thing for somebody else watching was probably when I started leading him with the lead rope and I had a wheelbarrow behind me so that I would make sure that he wasn't going to get, too excited and jump on my back. And that worked out pretty well. So that were some of the adventures that we had together before we got another horse to be his companion.
Now, let me ask, you said you did it through the door. You put the halter on before you went into his space, if you will. Yes. So is that something that was recommended through the readings that you've done?
No, it was just something I figured out for myself. Like, how do I do this without feeling like I'm going to get, jumped on, kicked accidentally? He was not an aggressive horse, but he was pretty, he could be challenging at times. And he was super curious, and he was the kind of personality that you really had to establish your boundaries, but not in an aggressive way. He did not like, sort of old school horse trainer type people. He really liked people that had horse savvy, that really understood that this was a partnership, not just I'm going to dominate you kind of a relationship. And so I would say that was probably the biggest lesson that I learned, was how to set appropriate boundaries. And it went from, working with him and setting boundaries, but it also worked in my, in my own life as well. So it was really quite an amazing thing. And then as I've developed with horses over time, I started including them in retreats that I offer here on our organic farm in Vermont. And what I noticed was just such a profound awareness that people had about themselves after working with horses. Like, they could see themselves differently. And one of the examples I have of that is I did a retreat with some female veterans about 11 years ago. Actually, it was female veterans and non-veteran women. And we did this, a bunch of different experiences with horses. And this woman who's a friend of mine, who's also a horse whisperer. And I remember this one veteran woman was trying to walk a horse with a lead line, but the horse was really walking her. And she remarked, "Oh, wow, he reminds me so much of my son." And I think her son was 3 at the time. And so she started to notice that, wow, I'm supposed to be the one leading this horse, not having the horse, kind of pulling her along. And so that just kind of gave her some interesting insight into how she was showing up. And, this is a woman that was trained as I think she worked, forget which branch of the military, but anyway, trained to be a leader. And so it was a really interesting experience for her to notice, how she was being treated by the horse because of how she was being with him.
So can you expand on that just a little bit, just for clarification? You're talking about the horse you adopted now communicating with a full-grown horse. Is that what I'm assuming?
Right. So actually, I was shifting to a different horse, not my own. So
Okay.
in this retreat, we used my friend's horses because they were
Okay.
experienced with all these different techniques that she did with people. But I'll give you a good personal experience because it'll be easier for me to explain it. So my daughter had a very serious, life-threatening health problem at one time. And we had gone through like 22 days in the hospital and all these different treatments, and she's okay now. But I had come back, and another friend of mine who's also a coach and works with horses and I were doing a session, and there was this big, beautiful white horse named Freedom that I was going to work with. And what we did with her was we had a round pen. Do you guys know what that is? Round pen. So it's like a circular thing of fence so that you're inside with the horse.
Mm-hmm.
So I was supposed to walk inside with this giant horse. And I, had experience by this time. I think my horse Coco was probably, oh gosh, at least 10 by that time. And this horse Freedom was running around and acting like a crazy man. And I thought, wow, I really don't feel that comfortable going in there. So I said to my friend Janice, I said, "What's up with Freedom? This is really kind of a little bit scary behavior." And so she said, "Okay, why don't you just turn around, put your back to Freedom, and let's talk for a few minutes." And so I think we spent maybe 5 or 10 minutes talking, and I told her kind of what was going through my mind about, this experience that I had just been through with my daughter. And then I just started to take some deep breaths and kind of just chill out and be present in the moment instead of in my head thinking about all these worrisome thoughts. And then I turn around and I see Freedom is just standing there looking at me. He stopped running around and going crazy. And I thought, that's interesting. Now, I've done this before, so I should have known that my own energy was going to have an impact. But I was so caught up in the moment of that, thinking and talking. So then I walk into the round pen with him, and he's just standing there, and then he starts to follow me around, and I can pet him. And the next thing I know, he's down on the ground looking at me, just putting his feet up in the air in this completely vulnerable, behavior. I thought, oh my gosh, this is really incredible that, in 10 minutes, I shifted myself and that completely shifted his behavior. So that's one of the many examples of, what can happen when you interact with horses, because they are just incredibly attuned to everything in their environment, right? Because their safety depends upon it. And so they're sensing they can even sense your blood pressure. and they know when you're scared. And so a lot of times what I've noticed with people that kind of act, tough and macho with horses is I think that sometimes they're scared, but they're trying to overcompensate and, act as though that they're stronger feeling than they actually are. And
That's
so
not
that
just
was
with
something that I
horses.
was really careful about with my horse, Coco, is I wanted to be sure that I could be authentic, right? So if I was going to be working with him, I didn't want to just pretend that I was feeling confident. I really had to set the situation up like with the wheelbarrow dragged behind me so I could feel like, okay, well, at least there's a space between us.
That's not just with horses. There's an old saying that says, if you got to tell everybody how tough you are, you're probably not as tough as you think you are. So,
Yeah.
that's not just with horses. I call that LMS, little man syndrome. That's not just with
Oh, that's a
horses.
good one.
But yeah.
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 That's very true. Yeah, I mean, I think we see that all the time that, a lot of times the most insecure people have a lot of bluster.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Interesting.
and they're afraid to turn their back to other people, by the way. So
Oh, that's true.
that's what struck me about what you're saying, is that she told you to turn your back,
Yeah.
and that gained their trust. So that's a remarkable thing that now that I think about it, that is very important, even with dogs or whatever. If
Yeah.
you can walk away from a situation feeling unthreatened, not like you're trying to be the alpha,
Right.
that's significant. That's really good.
So I have a question going back to the beginning of our
Sure.
time today. If a horse jumps on your back, does that give new definition to horseback?
You don't want a horse jumping on your back, that's for sure.
Oh, that's not what they mean by horseback riding, because the horse is riding on your back?
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah.
Have either of you worked with horses or ridden horses before?
I have a long time ago ridden horses. I haven't worked with them yet. I do. It is my goal when I retire. My son is currently in the 3rd grade. So after he retires, it is to buy land and have an equine assisted therapy ranch that focuses on veteran services, as well as
No way.
partnering with other nonprofits like churches and schools and things like that to do like
Oh,
real
that's awesome.
authentic cowboy type retreats and things of that nature. But the purpose of the ranch would be to provide that equine assisted therapy that the veterans would basically be the cowboys that run the
That's
whole
awesome.
ranch and work with the animals. So
Do you know the
that
work of
is my
Monty
goal.
Roberts?
What's that?
Do you know the work of Monty Roberts?
I am not familiar with that. No.
Well, definitely check him out. He was the person that the Horse Whisperer movie was kind of modeled after. He does something called Join Up, which I've also done with other people in my retreats. And again, it's the round pen, but this time it's really different. This time, my Horse Whisperer friend Peggy goes into the pen with this whoever turn it is, right? And there's a horse in there with them. And using what they call a carrot stick, which is basically just this long stick with a string on it, they're moving that horse around the outside of the ring with them standing in the center, and they're changing the horse's directions. And so in horse language, whoever moves the other one's feet is the boss, right? So if, for example, if you're standing there and a horse kind of nudges your shoulder and you think, oh, isn't that cute? But you take a step back, that horse owns you.
Right. Yeah. He just called the shots. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the thing that happens with Join Up is so remarkable. So you've got this horse running around, ultimately trotting and turning directions. And then all of a sudden, when you start to see signs of what's called licking and chewing, they're doing that with their mouth, right? Or they kind of drop their head a little bit towards the ground. That's a sign that they're saying, okay, I've had enough. Can I be part of your group? Because horses have to be with herds in order to feel safe, right? Because whoever's on the outside is more likely to get picked off by a mountain lion. And so the two people in the center are the herd. And so again, with the turning of the back, you turn your back because you have trust that that horse is going to choose to come over to you. And I've not seen it not happen. But what will happen is you'll start to feel, breathing like kind of at the back of your neck, or you'll maybe get a little nuzzle on your shoulder. And then you turn around and you pet the horse and love on him or her and essentially reward them by saying, yep, you can be part of the herd. And so then without a lead rope or anything, you can start walking around the pen and that horse will follow you. And that's called Join Up. And I've seen Monty do this with veterans and other people, and
Mm.
I'm pretty sure you can find it on YouTube, in fact. It's absolutely fascinating. And it's just this really powerful moment of connection with this other being where, there's mutual trust and they say, I want to be with you. And you don't have to drag them around to make that happen.
Yeah, no, that's amazing stuff. And they do normally use those round pins for things like lead training and walk training and things like that with the horses. And so that's not all they're used for. It's not exclusive, but it's primarily things like that, different type of
Yeah.
trainings like that those round pins are used for. They're really good. Yeah, I'd like to get several hundred or several, or 1,000 acres or so out there and be able to put up a decent working
That sounds
range.
awesome.
So we still got a few years to go. We got other ventures we're dealing with now, but that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
So
Very
in your
cool.
work with horses, though, what is probably the most impactful thing you've learned about?
I think
just
I would have to
horses?
say it's about boundary setting and how important that is. And it doesn't mean, being rough or cruel or anything like that. It's really just setting appropriate boundaries so that, in the case of me working with a young horse, especially not being terribly skilled, I had to make sure that, he stayed in his spot and I stayed in my spot, and I didn't want him, pushing me. And if he started to get a little close, I would wiggle the lead line so that he would back up and get out of my space. So it taught him, nope, you stay here unless I invite you in. And so I have really utilized that idea of boundary setting in my life even more, with people because of that experience with him.
Yeah, it's a big thing that I've had to learn over the years because I'm a really open person, but I'm also pretty. I guess the only way I can describe it is alpha. Like I will speak my mind when it's time. I'll
Yeah.
put up with a lot in the meantime, but I like the way you put that because when you're setting boundaries and you're starting in a circle, right? That's going to be a contained area and all that stuff, and then you can finally open that gate and take them out, and then go into the whole space. They already know what their boundaries are by the
Yeah.
time you've trained them, so that's a
Mhm.
really good explanation.
Right. And if you don't, it's dangerous. And that's one of the things. So for me, it was kind of, I don't want to make it sound too dramatic, but a little bit of a life and death kind of scenario, right? If I hadn't created those appropriate boundaries, I could have gotten really hurt.
Mhm.
And so, my safety depended on me saying, hey, this is where you stand. This is where I stand. We can, come together respectfully, but I'm not going to have, you pushing me over. So, and what I also know about myself is I tend to be an overgiver, but I'm also very honest. And, so it's an interesting dynamic to find that balance point.
If you hear some thumping, it's because my flooring is getting installed upstairs. Anyways, that's a great parallel because having that balance and being able to communicate that, whether it's through your physical behavior and mannerisms with animals, or whether it's through words with people, it's absolutely important to be able to
Yeah.
bring that balance.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think we humans don't necessarily realize how much we depend upon body language, which is how horses are reading us all the time. And I can't remember what the statistics were, but it was something really remarkable about how much of our communication is actually body language versus words spoken. And it made so much sense to me as I thought about, the work with horses, because they're reading us, like I said, and we're communicating things through our own body language and breathing and, blood pressure and not so much the words, right? Because they're reading our body more than what words we're saying.
Yeah, they can tell if you're relaxed or stressed. I mean,
Absolutely.
even a dog walking by, if you get the chills, you keep your distance, that kind of stuff, because you can feel
Yeah.
that immediately.
Mhm.
That's an instant reaction. I mean, that's okay. I'm going to keep my distance, but I'm going to teach you to trust me. And those are the
Yeah.
ones that I do exactly what you said. Turn your back, so that
Right.
you're non-aggressive. So that's
Yeah.
a beautiful way of putting that.
I had an interesting experience with my first dog. I adopted this dog who, I think he was 6 weeks old by the time we took him home, but we met him at 1 week of age, and he chose us. Like, there were 10 or 12 puppies, and this one came and sat in my lap, and I tend to be the one that animals come to, I've noticed, whatever animals they are. And so I was just kind of working with him and training him to some extent too. And I remember one time I was walking him and there was a man sitting on a bench and my dog never growled, but he looked at that guy and he growled and I thought, "Ooh, he's picking up on something there that I'm not even aware of." And I thought, having grown up in New York City, I tend to have like eyes on the back of my head just to kind of make sure I know where everybody is in my space. But my dog picked up on something that was not good. And I thought, "Woo, I'm going to pay attention to that."
Mhm.
Yep. Dogs are good for that. Animals are a lot more instinctual by nature, I think, than we as human beings
Absolutely.
are.
Yeah.
And so you need to follow your animal's instincts, especially once you learn the animal learns you. It's
Yeah.
true with equine just as it is with dogs, right? There's
Yes.
been times I'm walking my dog, and as it gets dark, she'll stop and won't go around a certain corner, and I
Oh,
don't force it.
really?
I just like, all right, let's go the other direction. Let's start
That's
backing up.
fascinating.
And I don't know what the reason is for that. We'll take
Yeah.
that corner 6 times during the day. All of a sudden, as it's getting dark, and it doesn't happen all the time, but I'm just saying that's one thing that's happened, that
That's
if you're in
fascinating.
tune with your animal and you learn your animal, their instincts are there. And if they love you, they'll naturally do things like that to protect you.
Yes, absolutely.
Horses
Yeah,
are the same way.
I have a
Horses are
podcast
extremely
also.
intelligent and
Say it
intuitive
again?
animals. Horses are extremely intelligent and intuitive, and they're very similar
Absolutely.
in that aspect.
Yes, indeed. And one thing that I learned about dogs that I thought was so fascinating is that dogs, because we humans have spent so much time with dogs, in our evolution, they've learned human so much better than a lot of other animals. They really understand, and that just the unconditional love is incredible, with the dog.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I was starting to say I have this podcast and I've interviewed holistic veterinarians, but also a couple of animal communicators. And it's really fascinating, that whole world of understanding that you can actually telepathically communicate. You don't necessarily have to use words or even
Right.
body language. You can actually think different things. And oftentimes your dog or cat or horse will actually know what you're trying to tell them.
And
Pretty
that can
cool.
go as small as bees and wasps also,
Oh
because
yeah.
the key to beekeepers, you think it's just the steam that they're putting out there, but the thing that they're thinking and putting out there is honeycomb, 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 honeycomb,
Oh, that's
honeycomb,
interesting.
honeycomb. So they're know you're bringing peace to their environment.
Right.
And I've avoided many bee stings and wasp stings since the last time I got wasp stings, because I looked up how to prevent it, and that's what came up.
Wait, so tell me that one because I've had an issue with wasps in the past.
You
What
just you
what's the
just
way?
you just you put it out to your mind. Honeycomb, 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 honeycomb,
Instead
honeycomb.
of thinking, "Oh my goch, this thing is gonna sting me."
Exactly.
Oh, that's fascinating.
You just bring
Now I want a
peace.
bowl of honeycombs.
Yeah, I know, right?
The cereal.
Bring some
I
fresh
used to like
cream.
that.
You're speaking it into existence, dude.
Late night snack.
I don't even have any now. I got to go to the store. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. No problem.
I don't want to
But
go anywhere.
but yeah,
Goodness.
that was one of the fascinating things that I found, just in my basic research. When people are really in tune to the animals that they're harvesting from, I think is what it is.
Yeah.
Then they learn a way to think that way. And so
Mhm.
if there's something that's important to that particular insect or animal, you can literally control them to like either stay away or come love you, kind of
Fascinating.
thing. So
Yeah.
it's a real thing. I could go way deep into this, but Not for Deb's podcast. A podcast for another day. But yeah, so I mean, no, I totally get it. When the animals read your body, you can put out a thought. They can sense that, and that's a fact.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that I thought was really interesting too is this holistic veterinarian friend of mine said, just because your animal has one symptom of something doesn't mean that they are necessarily sick. You're supposed to look at all the other different signs. Are they eating normally? Are they moving around normally? Are they, drinking water, going to the bathroom, all these different things? And one of the things she reminded me of is if you are stressed out worrying about your animal's health, that's actually going to impact them.
Right.
And so it's kind of reminded me of when you were talking about the bees and the wasps. If you imagine that pet calm, peaceful, healthy, all those different things instead of, oh my gosh, what's going on? Am I going to have to take them to the vet? I think usually you'll have a better outcome.
I can't agree more.
Yeah.
Anthony?
I don't worry about bees unless they're in the car. And then I start sounding like the Secretary of Defense, like, you mess with the wrong person, your life is at risk, like
I had a really interesting, I think they were honeybees story. So in my old house, I was sitting at my desk looking out the window, and the next thing I knew, I saw this big, huge mass of bees fly into, which must have been a knothole in the side of my wood siding. And I thought, oh my God, where did they go? And so I could hear them buzzing inside my wall. And I thought, that doesn't sound like a good thing to have bees in my wall, especially if they're making honey. So I called a local beekeeper and I asked him if he could come over and get them out. And so he built this staging and got the queen and then put her in a new box, and all of them went, in the box, and he was able to take them back to his place. And he said that they were, some of the nicest bees he'd ever met. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? But I thought that was so fascinating too, that all of a sudden this just swarm, chooses this wall that I'm having, looking out the window, and I see them. And he told me he's never seen that happen in all of his years of beekeeping. So I kind of felt lucky that, I had this very unique experience, but I was very glad that they got removed and had a better life somewhere else.
That's good. That's good. So, Amy, what else would you like to tell us about your experience in rescuing your horse, and maybe something else significant about that?
Yeah. So I think one of the really important things for me too, I've been a green living educator for 34 years at this point. And so one of the things that I really wanted to make sure I did was feed my horse and keep him as healthy as possible, but not using a lot of chemical types of inputs. So, that meant eating hay and grass and hardly any grain, really, because grain can be very inflammatory producing. And then just getting him, natural salt for a salt lick, and letting him choose different minerals, and, giving him organic carrots and apples for treats periodically. And yeah, so I think that was another piece that, I do that with my daughter, or I did that with my daughter when she was little, and any of my pets. Like, I have 2 dogs now, and I make their food for them. So they're getting all homemade stuff. So I feel like the same kinds of life strategies that I'm using to reduce toxins, I also used with Coco.
It's very good. I mean, that's a life lesson for people too, by the way. But that's
Yeah,
also why
especially
we're
in
here.
this toxic world that we live in, right?
Yeah, that's also why we're here. That's why we teach pet and human health and wellness.
Yeah.
It's a big thing, and the animals know when you're giving them good food, and
Oh, yes.
they also know when you're eating good food, and then they want to have a snack while you're eating your good food.
Yep. Yeah, one of my dogs sits right at my husband's feet because he knows he's going to drop crumbs, not necessarily on purpose.
So any services that you provide that you'd like to tell the listeners about, go ahead and let us know what the services
Sure.
are and how they can find you.
Great. So the best place to find me is on my website, which is greenlivingnow.com. And I have the Green Living Now podcast, which you can find on YouTube and all the big podcast platforms. And I interview people all about holistic health and green living and sustainable agriculture. And I offer courses. My signature course right now is the Your Non-Toxic Kitchen Reimagined. It's like a really short way to look at your kitchen differently and have a framework for making decisions so that you don't always have to, ask an expert or get, so stressed out and overwhelmed because this new study just came out, or a company that you love the product from just got bought out by a corporation. So this is really teaching you how to look at your kitchen in a totally different way and reduce toxins. And that's things like, trying to limit your exposure to plastic. That's one of the big things that I think is so important.
Yeah. Microplastics are definitely a problem.
Yes, they are.
Don't
drink from bottled.
It's a cheap way to store food, but
yeah,
but it's not nearly as pure as glass. So I guess with that, we're going to close it out. But again, go to debspets.com. That's DEBSPETS.com. You can say hi to Pate and Pooh on your way out. And Anthony, with that, give us our closing.
As always, you are loved, valuable, and appreciated. And we want to do anything we can to help you. We'd rather have that 3 a.m. conversation than to hear your name in the headlines the next morning. So please feel free to reach out to us. Anything we can do, we will do. Anything we can't do, we'll try to help as best we can. So please feel free to reach out. And as always, thank you for being here, Amy. We appreciate you putting up with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we let David off of his lead today to come out and do the show. And, so.
All right, guys. God bless you.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you. I'm glad that you joined us for At World of Pets podcast. We would like for you to take a look at what our sponsors have to offer, and that sponsor is debspets.com. You can access it through the QR code, or you can just go to the website. So thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again next week.